Thanks. I'm glad that I was invited to be a part of this. And my background, even though it's in critical care and trauma, I've fallen into the area of teaching for peds. I do live on a farm, and I don't have any children of my own, but on the farm where I live, they have 70 grandchildren. So there's no lack for children in on our farm. Anyways, I'm going to talk about the developing cultural competence and global awareness as far as it pertains to African Americans. So before we jump across the ocean and talk about what's going on over in Africa, the roots of where our African Americans came from, we'll just take a look at some of the demographics of the African Americans in the States here. As far as population density, most of them are centered down in the south. There's a pocket over to the southwest and up along the East Coast. Most of your urban areas. What are the 10 leading causes of death in the African American population? We won't go through all of these, but I want to show you a couple graphs of how predominant some of these diseases are amongst African Americans. African Americans are actually at highest risk for heart disease, and they have the highest prevalence of hypertension. And some of the research is showing that it's possible that they have a predisposition to being sensitive to salt. And I thought that was pretty interesting, that would cause them to have increased incidence of heart disease. What's happening in their ethnic race concerning cancer? Well, they're at the top again. And when you compare it with their prevalence of smoking, their prevalence of smoking is about the same as what it is for whites, and yet their incidence of lung cancer is still higher. I thought this was an interesting bit of information here. You know, 42.3% of Native Americans and Alaskan Natives smoke, and yet look at their incidence of lung cancer is quite a bit lower. So I thought that was an interesting kind of side finding. As far as the African Americans, again, incidence and mortality are tops. When it comes to breast cancer, though, African Americans have a lower incidence compared to Caucasians, but when it comes to mortality, they're at the top again. Prostate cancer, men are at the top again. Although it is interesting to see that there's a decreasing trend. Actually, it is in all races. Stroke, they're twice as likely to die than Caucasians. The rate of first-time strokes is twice as much as what it is for Caucasians. It tends to occur earlier in life. And also they tend to become more disabled as a result of a stroke. Diabetes, top of the list again there. The black squares there are the black females, this line, and then the green diamonds are the male. And as far as diabetes, instead of having a declining incidence, they're on the climb. But I think it is trending across all races that it's on the increase. Unintentional injuries, that includes vehicular accidents, poisoning, falls, fires, and drowning. And your adolescents are at the top for all of those, not just with African Americans. This graph includes all races. Something of interest is to take notice of this population, which are those that are 80 plus years, and that's in the category of falls. They're almost at the top. Traffic accidents, your adolescents, and then those that are in the 30 to 44 year range, they're at the top. Adolescents for fires, I didn't understand that one. Adolescents and fires. Drownings, you look at this population here, which is 0 to 4-year-olds. One of the reasons, and children that are around 2 years of age have a high incidence of drowning, and they can drown in just a small amount of water in the bottom of a bucket. Do you know why? Because they're interested in looking at the water and they see their reflection. And because their head is disproportionately larger than the rest of their body, they're top heavy, so they fall into the bucket. And then they get trapped at their shoulders, they can't get out. So a friend of mine out in Colorado, she lost a child 18 months for that very reason, and there was only that much water in the bucket. They just go in head first. Homicide, the encouraging thing is that it's on the decline. But again, this black dashed line here, the blue dashed line is for the African American population, quite a bit higher than the other races. Okay, so let's travel across the Atlantic now and take a look at what is happening with the African population, the roots of where the African Americans came from. And I think you'll be surprised. I can talk from first-hand experience of what I saw living with these people. And it's not something that's happened centuries or decades ago. This is how they currently take care of illnesses and what they think of health. First, let's take a look at some of the common illnesses. They'll look a little bit different than what we face here in the United States. We look at health problems in the United States predominantly as being lifestyle related. But when you go overseas, especially in these remote locations, you're talking about communicable, infectious and communicable diseases. So a lot of these that I'm going to show you are infectious communicable diseases, but they're at the top of the list as far as issues that the Africans have to deal with. African trypanosomiasis, the common name is African sleeping sickness, comes from the tsetse fly. I saw some of these when I was over in Africa and was even bitten by some of them, and I can testify to the fact when they bite you, they take a chunk of meat. They're very painful. And then as you look at this map of Africa here, the hot spot is a diagonal right across the continent. Senegal, which is where I lived for 6.5 years, is all the way over to the west. People can die from African sleeping sickness, but there is treatment for it. Dengue fever, it's also called dengue fever. You may have heard of this because there are a couple cases that you'll hear in this area from time to time. And it is in the southeastern part of the United States. Not by much, but there's some that are there. They get a fever, a rash, and extreme pain in their joints. In fact, the other name for this disease is called breakbone disease. So very painful. It's carried by a mosquito. Okay, filariasis. Take a look at this lady's leg. Looks like a tree trunk. This is one of our villagers, and she got this disease carried by a mosquito. It's in the same genus, but a different family from the mosquito that carries malaria. It's Aedes aegypti is the type of mosquito. And they'll get swelling of the extremities and also the gonads. Women get enlarged breasts, men get enlarged scrotums, and it's a lymphatic system disease. It attacks that part of the body. And this map here, it shows what the incidence of it is across the United States, a lot of the continent of Africa, and a lot of Brazil, China, India, some of the hot spots. Cutaneous larva migrans. This is called creeping eruption. That's the common name for it. And it comes from the urine and feces of dogs and cats, and it's a hookworm. So if you have children that sit on the ground, like African children who don't wear a diaper or pants, they're just nude, sit on the ground, they get it on their buttocks. Other people will get it on their feet because they're walking without shoes on. And of course, that's a picture of it over here. So it looks like a little worm, track that's gone through there. The worm itself is fairly small, but this is a track that it's made on that person's skin. It's self-limiting. It'll go away in about 3 months, but it's very itchy. And that's a hallmark of it. I've seen villagers go up to a very porous rock and just scrub their feet on it until they take the sole of their foot off. It's just very itchy. Again, it's treatable with medication, or you can just let it do its lifespan in 3 months and scratch a lot. Then there's the guinea worm. The good news about this is that it's almost eradicated. So what happens is a person is contaminated by going into water with an open sore, and the eggs from the female, which is inside this blister, which eventually opens up and starts to drain. I'll get back to that. But anyways, a person will drink the water will drink water that's been contaminated, drinks it, goes through the developmental stage in the gut, and then the worms go out into the tissues. The male worm will go out into a muscle and just die. The female tends to like the leg because the worm is fairly long. These can grow to be 1 meter long. That's 39 inches. So this is a big worm. So then it develops a blister once it's ready to start laying eggs, usually on the foot, and eventually that blister opens up. And once a day, the worm will come out and lay its eggs, and then it goes back in. When that blister is open and she's laying eggs, if that person goes into fresh water, that's when the eggs are deposited in the water. And that's when the next person comes and drinks contaminated water, and then they get infected. Different ways you can take care of this. There is medication you can take by mouth. There's you can take the same medication, grind it up and make it into a paste and put it over the sore. Or the way the Africans do it, because they don't have access to the medication a lot of times, is by doing this. Once a day you take the person's foot and you put it in cold water, and the cold water will make the worm come out. And they grab a hold of it, and then you pull on it until you get resistance, and you roll it up on a matchstick or a twig or something, and then you attach it to the person's foot, piece of tape or some gauze, or put a leaf over it or something, and you wait till the next day. You put their foot in water, some more of it comes out, and you keep doing that for about 7 days. It takes about 7 days to do this, and you can actually pull the entire worm out alive. The good news is this is almost eradicated. Then there's schistosomiasis. Again, it's a parasite. This one here needs a body of fresh water, and it also needs this snail as an intermediate host in order to complete the whole cycle for infection. And then again, the person goes swimming, or these ladies are doing laundry in the fresh water, and these parasites actually just penetrate right through the skin. And it can go to the liver, can go to the intestines, or it can go to the kidneys. Again, it's very treatable, but if it's not, you go into kidney failure, liver failure, intestinal problems. Then there's leprosy. We did have leprosy in Senegal. The hot spot of the world is actually India. I read a statistic that 60% of the cases of leprosy in the world are in India. And there's a book that was written, I can't think of the name of the author, if you like to read. The name of the book is The Gift of Pain. And it's an excellent book of research that was done on tendon transplants, treatment for leprosy, getting people back into the community that have been treated for leprosy, but they look like they still have leprosy. They lose digits. Whoops. Sorry. Go back. They lose digits. Like on this hand, they can lose toes. They lose a feeling in them. So these people, if they're laying on the floor, which a lot of them do, on the mud floor of their huts, and rats or mice come through during the night, they'll just eat their fingers and toes, but they'll never wake up because they never feel it. So that's one way of losing digits, but also the process of the disease will cause them to lose features. Like this lady has lost the cartilage and shape of her nose, and it's all because of leprosy. They got nodules on their ears, and the ears will deform. They can go blind, and it's all because of leprosy. There was a leprosarium in the United States. It was down in Louisiana, and there was also one in Hawaii, and they no longer exist. The one in Louisiana actually existed in my lifetime. It was only up maybe to about a decade ago. And even though the people were treated and no longer had leprosy, they kept the leper colony open because these people that lived there, it was their family. They had become family. And they left it open just for them to continue on with their life. Tuberculosis, huge problem worldwide, but especially in Africa. And one of the problems is that they don't complete the treatment. And by not completing the treatment, they develop a resistance to the medications. And that's why tuberculosis has become a multi-drug resistant disease. So it's becoming more and more difficult to treat. We think of tuberculosis basically with the lungs, but it can infect any of these other parts of the body. And you'll see this in Africa. It's called Pott's disease, and that's tuberculosis of the spine. They'll get nodules on it, and then they get these deformities. That's quite a pronounced one, but just so you know that tuberculosis can affect other parts of the body. Malaria, huge killer of populations in the tropics. I can speak from personal experience. I had malaria twice. You can survive. And a lot of these places, as long as you're taking a preventative, you're The symptoms won't be as bad, but you'll still be impacted by it. You can still survive. There are a lot of people, and like in our village, it was like 100% of the villagers had malaria sometime in their lifetime. It's carried by the Aedes Anopheles mosquito, and it's only carried by the female, not the male. And with malaria, they call the female the silent killer. The male doesn't carry it. So if you hear a mosquito buzzing around your ear, you're safe. It's the male. It doesn't carry malaria. But if you get some mosquito bites and you're unaware of it, it could be that it was a female. Goes through a cycle. You're stung by the mosquito. They actually spit into you. The question has always been, can I get AIDS? Because of the mosquito having taken a blood meal from somebody that has AIDS, and now the mosquito has stung me. The answer is no, because it goes through a life cycle in the mosquito where they take the blood meal, they digest it, and when you get stung by a mosquito, they're actually spitting into you. So it's their saliva that's carrying the parasite. Goes into the liver, goes through a liver cycle. Eventually they go out, the parasites go out into the red blood cells. If your immune system is down, red blood cells will burst. The parasites are free, floating in the bloodstream, and now you have the symptoms of malaria. Severe headache, high fever, and again, it's very treatable. But it's a killer if it's not treated. I think it's up to 20% of people that go untreated for malaria will die. Then there's conjunctivitis, but I have to tell you an interesting story about this type of conjunctivitis. It can be bacterial or viral. There was a conjunctivitis going around in our village one day, and I was down visiting with the people, and they said, oh, I have Opelo today. So I could tell that they had conjunctivitis, and I wrote that word out. It was a new one for me. And I thought, well, okay, when my language helper comes, I'll ask him what this means. So I had my language helper there one day, and I said, I got a new word, Opelo. He said, yes. He said, that's the eye disease that the men brought back from the moon. Okay, we have something to write in our culture file. That's something new. And I found through some more research that it was all over West Africa. The name of this type of conjunctivitis was called Opelo. And the origin was that it came from the men that went to the moon. Well, in their culture, if there's a significant thing going on in their culture, and there's something else significant going on somewhere else in the world, they'll actually change the name of it because of the significance of it. So if you take Opelo and put the stress on a different syllable of the word, it becomes Apollo. And you can look in infectious communicable diseases books, and there's a type of conjunctivitis where the alternate name is Opelo. So it's like, hey, West Africa has helped, name some of the things that we have in medicine. But, it astounded me when he said that they brought it back from the moon, and I'm thinking, some of these people in the village never even left the village, and they're talking about men walking to the moon. But anyways, it did come back from, they had heard about when the man stepped on the moon back in 1969. Multiple eye problems, a lot of times is because of dust getting in their eyes. The dust can carry infection. Trachoma, serious eye disease. You see it in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's a bacterial infection, and it affects the inside of the eyelids. And here you can see where they turn the upper eyelid inside out. You see these little bumps on it. That's at the height of its infection. Then the spots disappear, but then it leaves scar tissue. And then there's these little bumps will start scratching on the surface of the eye, as well as when the conjunctiva on the inside of the upper eyelid shrinks. When it's become scarred, it actually inverts the upper eyelid. And when it does that, it pulls the eyelashes towards the eyeball. So every time they blink, the eyelashes will scrub the front of the eyeball. So in doing that, they develop this. It clouds over the cornea. So you get a severe corneal abrasion, and they'll go blind. They'll be able to see if they have a corneal transplant. So there's different ways of taking care of that. If you're in a village and somebody has this problem, they can take care of it by plucking all the eyelashes, so then they won't be scrubbing the front of the eyeball. But definitive treatment is to have surgery, and they take a scalpel and actually split the edge of the eyelid, and it'll flip the eyelashes out again. Not something that we would do, but there are ophthalmologists that come to visit these places, and that's what they would do for that. Onchocerciasis, or river blindness, a very common problem in our area. It's carried by a sandfly. So you can see that insects can be a carrier disease in a big way in countries like this. Blindness, you can see the results of that, where this son has to lead his father around with a stick. And that, they don't have them put a hand on their shoulder or anything, they have them use a stick. Okay, so what's the African worldview of the origins and causes of disease? It's going to be very different than what ours are. It could be a natural cause, it could be spiritual because of sprites and genies. I'll show you an example of that shortly. It could be because of humans, and those are caused by sorcerers. A sorcerer is a human, a living human, who has special powers to do harm to other people. So they do believe that nothing is coincidental. We come from a culture where we think of health from a scientific worldview. Their worldview comes from a spiritual perspective. Everything has a cause. So one day, I was walking down the trail, and I happened to trip, and there was a lady with me. She said, "Oh, you didn't just trip. The genie had her rice laying out on the trail, and she didn't want you to step on it." So things don't just happen. Also, they think of things in circular causality. I don't know if you ever heard of this, but there has to be a reason. So, for example, nunkarukuru is a disease where a child will have these severe spasms, and usually by day 10, the child will die. Now, I asked my language helper about that. He said, oh, that's when the mother, when she's pregnant, ate monkey meat from a certain monkey, the Dobie monkey. It's a gray monkey. And he said, even if they didn't actually do it, they must have dreamt about it and then forgot it. So if you think of this, what do you think's going on with that child? What do you think caused the death of that child? It happened at birth, they last 10 days, and they all die. And it has severe spasms, opisthotonus, just like the posturing of the baby. How about tetanus? And the reason that they get the tetanus is when the cord's been cut, somebody used a dirty instrument. So I saw 3 children in our village die because of that. But in their thinking, the mother ate gray monkey meat. And even if she didn't actually do it, she must have dreamt about it. And they all accept it. Even the mother, when the child dies, I guess I must have dreamt about eating monkey meat. Oops. Okay, how about their treatments for disease? This should be very interesting too. They do have indigenous plants, trees, and herbs. And then they do have root doctors. Root doctors can treat. They can't cure, but they can treat the symptoms. And they usually have a toolkit that includes a variety of things. Could be clay, certain kinds of clay, special kind of clay, certain stones, certain kind of shells, even teeth. And then there are also magical specialists, and every village has them, and ours did too. These claim that they can cure causes of illnesses, those that were caused humanly or spiritually. They use divination. Could be that they have a board with squares on it, almost looks like checkers, and they place stones on it. And by doing divination over this board, they can determine who did sorcery on you, and then they'll put a spell on them to cause them to die or some kind of misfortune. They can put stones in water, and it depends what happens with the water, and then they can take a portion of that, and that's the magic potion that will bring harm to the person that did harm to you. So, divination. Okay, so if they use plants, trees, or herbs, there are different parts that they use. Could be the leaves, bark, roots, pound them up. They could turn them into a powder, use the powder, put it in water, make an infusion that they have to drink. Decoction, it could be something that's pounded up and they put over a sore or something like that. This is a list of some of the things that they've used. That one kind of looks familiar. That's a star fruit, I believe. And there's parts of it that they use for cerebral malaria, pain. Now, the resource that I used for this said that they were credible uses. However, I do know from personal experience, you get down to this let's see, I think the battery's going dead, but anyways, down at the bottom there, the antidote for scorpion stings and snake bite, I highly doubt that. You get bitten by a viper, poisonous snake, there's not much you can do for that. Although, all that being said, I did see a couple snake bites while I was there, and the people did all survive. They all swelled, but eventually they did survive. You think about gonorrhea, is that? Most of the things that they use for natural causes, they would take care of pain, stomach aches, diarrhea, things like that. But when it comes to the bigger things, like scorpion stings and snake bites, I just kind of doubt it. Another plant, I've seen this when I was over there too. The people actually use the nut from this and they chew it, the cola nut. It's a stimulant, but they can also use it for other diseases there, fever. Some of these plants actually do help for fever. When you go into a place like this, you want to take a look at what are they already using and put it into 3 categories. What is it they're using? Does it work? If it does, hey, it's free, it's available, let them use it. And then there's another category that's not harming them, but it's not really doing any good. So you just kind of use that as an area of patience until you can introduce them to some of our medications. And then there is a category that they do use for poisons. So of course you want to keep them away from using those. There were some definite poisons that were over there. Does this plant exist in the United States? When I got this picture the other day, I'm thinking, does this look familiar in the United States, or am I just remembering from Senegal? But it's a common plant that's over there. Again, all the different uses for it. I thought this one was interesting here. It helps to expel the placenta. And this one is interesting too. It promotes courage in battle. I'm not so sure. This one here, I don't recall seeing that plant in our part of the continent, but it might be some other place. Again, here they have listed as leprosy. It's also listed as an anthelmintic. Something that does work for an anthelmintic is a medication that's used against worms. Something that does work are papaya seeds. So I always told my students when I teach an international course that you want to plant a papaya tree in your backyard if you're living in the tropics. If you take the fruit and you score the fruit, there's a white milky sap that comes out of it. If you take that, and the villagers will do this too, and you have a cut or an abrasion on your skin, they take that milky sap and they'll put it over top of it, and it's like a liquid Band-Aid. Now, it's also, papaya extract is used in A1 steak sauce, so the fairer your skin is, the more irritating it'll be. So, but it does work. The green flesh of the papaya fruit, if you have diarrhea or an upset stomach, the green papaya flesh is actually good for that. If you have worms, eat the seeds. A tablespoon of raw seeds, or you can let them dry and grind them up into a powder, and a teaspoon of that. Those do work. This plant, it actually comes off of a tree. I'm familiar with this one. Our word for the color yellow came from this tree. Yellow in Bajadanke, the tribal language where I was working with, is called Ti. But this is the name of that tree as well. If you open those pods, there's a yellow powder inside, and there's little seeds that are in there too, and they use those seeds almost like we use bouillon. So it was really pretty good. It says here that you can use it for female sterility. I'm not exactly sure about that. There's another tree that grows in Africa called the neem tree, has berries on it. And my language helper, he had said already that if a woman doesn't want to keep a pregnancy, in other words, abort a child, she will eat the seeds from the neem tree. Did they do it in our village? Absolutely not, because that was a big taboo when it came to Bajadanke culture. And then this last plant, I'm not familiar with this one, can be used for impotence. I'm not sure about that. Can be used for ringworm. A lot of these plants can be used for skin infections. So some things do work. Find out what works and let them use them. It's free and available. The baobab tree, I am familiar with this one because they were all over the place where I lived. The baobab tree looks, without its leaves on it, looks like it's been planted upside down. It's a very ancient looking tree, but it gets these pods on it. It's kind of fuzzy on the outside, and on the inside is a white powdery kind of fruit, and they do use that for diarrhea, and it does work. The pods are very the husk on the pod is very thick, so you actually have to give it a good whack on the ground to break it open. But it does work. How about their prevention of disease? This is a huge area. They wear charms, they use negativism, denial, do sacrifices and dances. These are actually pictures of people from our village. They'll wear amulets around their neck, their waist, or their ankles. This particular thing is called tafu. It's string medicine, where the string is attached to the ankle of the child and the opposite end is to its opposite wrist. And that's supposed to ensure that the child will grow to that height of the string. It rots off before they grow that tall, but they still put it on. She also has a necklace around her neck, and every mother who's nursing a child has one of those necklaces on. And it comes from a root. And if the baby has colic or a sick stomach, she'll bite a section off, chew it up, and spit it in the baby's mouth. And it actually worked. And then you also see children wearing these amulets around their neck, charms around their waist and their ankles again. The goat horn metal charms weren't too uncommon. The leather pouches usually contained a page of the Quran wrapped up in leather, and they're all supposed to be preventative medicine, keep them healthy. The cowrie shell, very important. And that's because they felt that the bright white color and the shine off of the surface would reflect light, and in doing that it kept the devil away. They always felt, and now for us in the village, they said, oh, the devil will definitely stay away from you, because at nighttime we had our fluorescent lights on. We had solar panels and we could run a fluorescent light. So they saw this big shining glow coming from our houses. So they thought we're very well protected from the devil. But they wear these as charms, and it's supposed to prevent the devil from affecting them. That young girl on the right was an initiate, and I'll talk about the initiation that they do in our village in a couple minutes here. But they all got a cowrie shell tied around their head, and that was the reason, to keep the evil spirits away while they were going through the initiation. Negativism. If you say that the baby's ugly, it'll keep the evil spirits away. So they often did things like that. I was a single lady, so they said a lot of negative things about that, and I had to think about what's their motive in saying what they did. They kept saying that I was going to get married, but they were going to marry me to the derelict of the village. So it was that negative encouragement kind of thing, and what they were doing was trying to encourage me to fit into their culture by getting married. So negative encouragement. Also, you never go up to a lady who's obviously pregnant and ask her, is she pregnant? Because now the devil knows that she has a baby, and now the devil can go and eat the soul of the baby. So you just never said that the lady asked her if she was pregnant. Multiple sacrifices. They had them throughout the year. There was always a sacrifice done at birth, during weddings and funerals. They did it for the environment, for the season, so that they'd have a good crop, prevent the wind from blowing their harvest over. And they also needed it for survival, personal survival, as well as survival of the village. So there were a lot of sacrifices around the time when they did the initiation of the youth. The length of time, this happened every 2 to 3 years. And just one morning, these 10 to 12-year-old children would wake up, and the blacksmith, one of the blacksmiths, would take a group of boys, and a certain lady in the village would take a group of girls, and they just took them out in the woods. These kids didn't know what was going to happen to them. And on that day, the blacksmith circumcised those boys, no anesthetic, and they're 10 to 12 years old. And on the girls, at least in our village, they removed the clitoris with a rice-cutting knife, no anesthetic. So in the long run, the women in our village had no pleasure in sex because they didn't have a clitoris. There are other parts of Africa, and I took a course in Toronto where one of the other ladies that was in a course with me, she had been in Rwanda, and she said, well, they remove everything. They remove the external genitalia, and they even sew the vagina shut except for a small opening. And that stays shut until the night of her wedding, the first night that she goes to bed with her husband. And then he sharpens one of his fingernails and he opens a vagina. Then he knows that he has a virgin. So, I mean, we can be thankful where we were born, right? We had no choice in that, but these things are still going on. I can tell you from firsthand experience. Dances are very important. Most times it's because they want prosperity for the initiates, for the wedding, for the harvest. They're trying to appease the evil spirits. They have fertility dances. I stayed away from those. And they also did dances just for fun. So if they said that there was going to be a dance, you know, I'd have to do a little searching first to find out, what are you dancing for? Because you didn't always want to be a part of it. And this is, I think it's my final slide. But it's pretty significant. And if you read one of the article that I have listed at the end here, it's a very excellent article. And this statement is pretty profound because this is exactly how our villagers lived. Fear of magical retribution for wrongdoing aids in maintaining the social control and certain standards of behavior. So they live in an environment of fear all the time. So yeah, those were my references. This one down here, this is the one I was talking about. And if you're interested in plants and herbs and trees that are used in Africa, that was an excellent article. And there's a website that it'll take you to that has a whole database of African plants and trees and things that they use for medicinal purposes. So I think that's it. Did you have any questions or something come to light or any comments?
What was the hardest thing for you being a professional nurse from the United States and then going to this area that is so remote? What was the most difficult thing you faced?
Oh, that's an excellent question because here I came from a critical care background. I mean, before I even went over to the field, the 10 years prior to going to the field was in critical care. 6 years was just in adults. Then I did pediatric and neonatal ICU up at Hershey. So I came from this environment of taking care of these little kids. And we had all the equipment, all the medication and all that. And I go over there and they have nothing. So I spent a lot of time watching these kids die. And older people too. But 80% of the deaths in our village, we kept our statistics, 80% of the deaths in our village were children under the age of 3. And most times it was because of starvation, and it wasn't because I didn't have food. It was all because of the spiritual thinking. So yeah, that was out of my control, but that was hard.
So they wouldn't feed the children? Is that why they died, or?
That was one of the things that would happen. I made a point to go to different parts of the village on a daily basis. Like each day of the week, I went to a different section. And that was one of the things I was looking for. One thing was to get different language helpers because you want to learn the language really well, and also build relationships. But on another side, I was looking into the dark corners. Is everybody here? Well, where's so-and-so? How's your baby doing? Then you start looking, and they would put them in the dark corners because if somebody gets sick, they didn't just get sick. The evil spirits are after them. And if you are part of taking care of them, you're risking yourself of being affected by the evil spirits. So yeah, they would put them in the dark corners. Malnutrition, they wouldn't feed them.
So they would like sacrifice them?
In a sense they would, and it was for preserving the community. It was to preserve the community. If you look at it from the big picture, they couldn't risk their survival by taking care of somebody that was sick at the risk of impacting the whole community with evil spirits. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, a different mindset from what we have here in a lot of ways. There's another article that I have at the end, and that article talked about what they found in the United States from the slave era and remnants that were left over archaeologically. And reading that article, it was like, I know exactly what they're talking about, and I know exactly what those things mean. They did find out what the meaning of some of the things were, like stones, bones, and different things like that. That goes to the traditional healers. But they did have in the article about the cowrie shell. And in the article they said, we don't know why we found so many cowrie shells. Well, I know exactly why. Because they reflect the light, you know, like I said here. But a lot of the things that what I showed is still going on in Africa. They found, like down in Louisiana and areas where the slaves were first brought, to confirm, yes, they did bring all those things with them. But then they syncretized their beliefs into Catholicism and Baptist beliefs. And now the transition has pretty much turned over to what the worldview of health is here in the United States. So, pretty interesting. I'm just talking about African American culture, but I've been to many other countries too. India, Central America, South America, Moldova, Egypt, Jordan, and that would be a whole totally different worldview, but very interesting. So I hope it was something of encouragement to you. Think outside the box when you take care of your international patients. You know, like if you see burns, round circular burns on the back of the neck of someone from Southeast Asia, have you ever heard of coining? And that's what you'll see there. Same thing, it's divination. You're trying to get the evil spirits to come out. Thinking of which, in the community where I lived, if they needed a shot, and they're thinking it was, bring it on, you know, I want a shot. They were very eager to get injections. And the reason was being, now they have a hole in their body to let the evil spirits out. So you don't think about that. We had a problem with goiters in our village because we had iodine deficiency. University of Virginia, I did a survey for them, and it was interesting. I did a population of age 12 to 45, and I only did female population because those were the ones you could see the goiter on. Not that the men weren't impacted too, but they're usually impacted by impotence. But the women, you could see the goiters. So I did this survey, and it was 100% of our women in that population had goiters. And it was because they had this iodine deficiency, partly because of their diet and also because of lack of iodine in their water. So I did get a canister that had iodine impregnated silicone capsules, and you drop it into their water source. And it actually put iodine into their water source for a year. And it actually did start shrinking them. So they started seeing us do things like this that were helpful, and they were starting to make some of the transition of realizing, hey, this really does work. Had a little boy in our village. I was walking through one day, and the father was sitting there with his little boy, and he said, Faye, look at my little boy. And this is exactly what he said. He said he's not black, and he's always sick. And I said, well, do you see your belly, your little boy's big belly? Do you see his little arms and legs? I said he has loads of worms in there. It doesn't matter how much food you give your boy, those worms are eating the food. I said, you see his hair, it's brittle, orange. And he said, yeah. I said, that's because the worms are eating the food. I said, if you go to the dispensary or the little clinic that we had there and go to Sundunku, the little village worker that I had trained, I said, he has some medicine there that'll help for the worms. I said, and if you want it to really work, you'll go back in 2 weeks or 14 suns, you know, because I don't have watches and don't go by weeks. I said, if you really want it to work, you'll go back in 14 suns. He said, I'm going to do that. And I kept walking on, you know, later on I'm thinking, I've heard this story before, in one ear and out the other. You know, you always had to have a plan B. So a couple months go by, and I came back from working out in a rice field this particular day, and I passed by the village center where the men were congregating and just taking a rest from the afternoon. And I'm talking to this one guy, but at the same time, I overhear this conversation. Do you see your little boy's big belly? Do you see his little arms and legs? They memorize what you say. These were illiterate people, and they literally memorize what you say because they don't have it written down. That was one of my purposes in going to. I was a linguist on our team, so I had to develop an alphabet and a dictionary and all that stuff where I was teaching them how to read and write. So anyways, verbatim. He said, you know, and it just went like wildfire. We couldn't keep worm medication in the dispensary anymore. So we had like a village-wide worm eradication, but they did it. And that's the success story that you want to see from a health perspective. So even, like I said, it's hopefully an encouragement to think outside the box when you're taking care of your international patients here, because we're seeing more of them. But also, you may have the opportunity to go overseas and do something like I did. Yes?
Did you have to get permission from anyone to like put the iodine in the well?
Oh yeah, the chief. Yep, the chief and the elders. They were the political leaders. So yeah, you needed to have the permission. And because they developed trust in us, we didn't do this like the first year that we were there. It was probably the third or fourth year. They knew we were there to help them. They saw results, and they said, sure, we'll try it. So we threw it into the well, and eventually the silicone capsules dissolved, but the canister was still there. And one day we saw it laying in the village. Somebody had fished it out, and the well was actually quite deep. So it must have caught on one of their buckets when they were trying to pull water out. You had a question too?
What other kinds of treatments did they use besides the plants and the nuts and things like that? Did they have any specific methods?
Like medication and things like that?
Yeah, or like mechanisms, besides like cupping or things like
Well, the divination, and then also the traditional healer, you know, where he had different mediums that he would use. I'll give you an example. This one comes to mind. There was a lady bit by a viper on her toe, and I should have brought it along so I could show you because it actually did work. I used a black rock for a snake bite. Has anyone ever heard of the black rock? You used to be able to get them in the United States, and I understand now that you can still get them if you go to a reptile show. Not on everybody's to-do list on the weekend. You know, I don't really like to go to reptile shows myself, but anyways, I heard that you can get them there. This lady was bit on the toe. One of my coworkers had a black rock. He said, maybe you want to try this. Well, you have to lance right near where the snake bite is to get a drop of blood. You need a drop of blood. So I lanced a spot, got a drop of blood, and I put the black rock. It's only about 2 inches long, 1 inch wide, and only like 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch thick. And it feels like a rock, looks like a rock, and it's black. Just got it near the blood. As soon as it made contact, it just sucked it right out of my hand. And it stuck fast to her toe, which was where she was bitten. It was on for 4 hours. And I thought, oh, I guess it's been on long enough, not knowing you leave it on until it falls off. And that might be up to 12 or 13 hours. But there was still nothing wrong with my taking it off because before I put it on, she had excruciating pain up to her groin. I stuck it on, and within 20 minutes, the only pain she had was down at the site where the rock was. So I took it off. Well, then they kept asking me, did you get the snake's teeth? No. So what they did that afternoon is they took her to a diviner who I'm sure had long sleeves on, and he had a bowl of water, and he did divination over her leg, and somehow got 3 snake teeth in the water. So then he showed her. Then she was convinced that she was cured. But actually it was a black rock, because he did nothing for her, but the black rock did. So when I came back from Africa, and I was back in the States, down in Laureldale, there's a rock and gem shop. It's not too far from where my mom lives, so I actually walked down there one day when I was visiting her. Took it down, and I said, could you tell me what this is, what kind of rock this is? So he took it back, he took a sliver off of it, and he came back and he said, all it is charcoal made out of a hardwood. So when you think about it, charcoal has absorbing properties. And the harder the wood is, the more pores it has. The more pores charcoal has, the more absorbing power it has. So by putting it on that drop of blood, actually as blood was circulating past it, and in that general area where most of the poison was at the time, it was actually sucking it out. So it actually did work. And there's a scientific and physiological reason of how it worked. So, but she may not have improved had she not known for sure that the snake's teeth were out. So yeah, there's the plants, the trees, herbs and things like that, but then they have their traditional healers, and then they have their sorcerers. It's a little bit more complex than over there than what it is here. Not to them. They know who to go to.
It's funny to see this presentation because you're pretty much talking about my own life. I've been in America since '86.
Okay.
I still remember living in the Dominican Republic, and they have a great mixture of true science and magic.
Yep.
Obviously, this is not true, but I'm going to share it with the class. The way my grandmother healed my asthma was by putting me on a tree, grabbing my hair, putting a nail in it, and hammer it and pull me off. So all my hair was on the tree, and allegedly that cured my asthma. A year later, my asthma was gone, but it wasn't because of the tree. Came to America, it was a colder environment, and that cured me. But to her, she cured my asthma. So it's funny to see this because it's in my culture, and they change it back and forth. And I know the truth by being here, but you still respect it. And I would never tell my grandma, no, you didn't heal me.
Yeah.
To her, she healed me, and you just have to keep it that way.
And the way, go ahead.
A lot of myths, just a ton of myths with
Yeah.
kids that are little. If they poop green, oh, you took them out too long in the cold. It has nothing to do with the cold, it's what they ate. But all those myths you respect. and just say, okay, that's how it is. But I know it's not the case.
And what your grandmother probably was doing, and the process was by nailing your hair to the tree and pulling you away, was transferring the illness into the tree. Yeah, they do the same kind of thoughts there.
It's amazing. I was like, that's my life. That's how it is back home, and you just respect it.
Yeah. And I think we need to think, I know when I was over in Africa, they thought about health in a very spiritual worldview, and here is scientific. I think there's a middle of the road. You know, I think here, in some ways, we miss some of the components of helping people improve their health by forgetting about that spiritual component. So, okay, I did actually go over the time. Wasn't planning on it, but great questions. Thank you.